Okay, and for folks who are cooking along, what I've done so far is I have broken down my jackfruit, and I'll give that quick demo right now. So my jackfruit is minced up and it's in this tiny bowl. I don't know how I'm gonna mix it, but I'll figure it out right now. My other bigger bowl is being used for the masa. And I have already portioned out my ingredients, except for my vegetable broth, because I literally just made the vegetable broth and it's still really hot. So I'll end up pouring some of that out and measuring it out in a moment. I've already de-stemmed and de-seeded my chile ancho and chile guajillo, and I gave them a rinse. So I took out all the seeds that were inside the stem, just cleaned them up a little bit. And the other thing that I did, I think that's mostly it. Everything else is just portioned out. So mostly the prep is like portioned out, cleaning chiles. You don't have to make your vegetable broth, but I did that. And I broke down my jackfruit. And again, happy Mother's Day to any mamas out there joining us today. Such an honor to have you here. My name is Jocelyn. I'm the chef and founder of Vida Verde, which is a plant-based business here in Los Angeles that focuses on culturally relevant plant-based foods. So, you know, today is a perfect example of that, of, you know, this dish, tamal dish that many of us have grown up eating, and our mothers and grandmothers, you know, gather every holiday season to make this. And here we are making a plant-based version. The traditional, quote unquote, traditional version, and I like to say quote unquote because the traditional version includes lard in the masa, but the reason I use the quotes is because, you know, I always like to ask, what does traditional mean? Because prior to colonization, we didn't have ports here in this land or on this land, and so we didn't have lard. And so our tamales were a bit different back then, right? But tamales have been made for generations prior to colonization. It's a staple in the Mexican diet. And so we didn't have oil, we didn't have lard. Our tamales were probably a bit drier back then, but still delicious. And then lard came along and it changed the game. And that became the new tradition. And so, you know, now we honor that old tradition and still try to figure out the in-between, right? That still honors the fact that our ancestors were mostly plant-based eaters that did eat meat around ceremony, but not on a daily basis like we consume today. So thank you again for joining. I am gonna get into the ingredients. And again, I did mention just kind of some basic guidelines. If you are in the chat box, Sarah will read those off for me while I'm cooking along. And you can always ask any questions, unmute yourself if you feel comfortable showing the video. That's great too. That way, if you are cooking along, I can see how you're doing in the process. You know, just feel free to be a part of it, to unmute yourself and have a conversation as needed. Okay. So for folks who have not worked with jackfruit before, make sure that you're purchasing the young green jackfruit. Let me see if I have one that's, oh, actually I have a can that I opened earlier. So I have a young green jackfruit, which is a jackfruit that's not ripe yet. I've had a few DMs from people who are like, I bought a whole jackfruit and I broke it down. Typically, because it doesn't grow here in the United States. It typically grows in tropical areas like Mexico, or Asia is like the biggest distributor to the United States. By the time it gets here, which means it's this very delicious, sweet tropical fruit, not good for savory dishes. So I had somebody reach out and they're like, how come my jackfruit dish is like not shredding and it's so sweet? I'm like, because you bought a whole jackfruit and you broke it down. So it has to be young green jackfruit, very important for this dish. And I think I wrote it, yeah, okay, it says green jackfruit. And I'm like, did I write that in the book? OMG, but yes, I did. And if you do have the book, the recipe that I am gonna be going through today is from my book, La Vida Verde, which just came out last month. And I am on page 73, which is the jackfruit tamales. The photo that we showed were ones that were not black. They didn't have the activated charcoal in the masa. I am gonna be doing that today because I'm gonna gift these tamales to my mother-in-law and my mom. But if you don't have the activated charcoal, no problem. It's literally just something to change the color of the masa, but it doesn't add any additional flavor. Activated charcoal is actually flavorless. So it's not a big deal. It's more of a visual effect on the tamales more than a taste or texture. And so we'll be making our jackfruit and Chile Rojo. And so when you get this jackfruit, let me bring my cutting board over. And actually, let me bring my can so I can squeeze in front of you. Okay. So when you take your jackfruit out of the can, it looks like this. I toss it into a strainer. It gets all the liquid out because in here it's jackfruit chunks as well as liquid. I strain it out. I like to give it a good rinse. And then the other thing I like to do, and before I squeeze it, because it's easier to see before I squeeze it, is just the different textures that this piece has. So you'll notice that the top of the jackfruit, which is from here up, is kind of shreddy. If I just run my fingers through it, I can easily break it apart and it starts to shred similar to a meat. But the bottom, or what I call the core, doesn't shred. I can run my fingers through it and it's just like a big chunk. And this I like to remove, but still use it in the dish. It's not trash. I'm gonna mince it up, so I'll show you quickly how I do that. And then sometimes in this top shreddy portion of it, there's some seed pods in there that are just round. They don't look like meat. And mostly I break this down and the seeds down, the core and the seeds, because it still tastes just like the other part of the jackfruit. So I want to include it in the dish. It just means more jackfruit on your plate. But I don't like the texture of it, so I need to just work it a little bit to get it there. And so what I do is I strain it, give it a rinse, and then I like to squeeze it in between my hands and see all that liquid coming out. And I squeeze it as much as I can, not until it's dry, because obviously it's wet, but you just want to get as much of the liquid out as possible. And you know, yesterday somebody mentioned, like, if you have a nut milk bag, you can use that. Absolutely. You can use a cheesecloth if you'd like. 3 cans is not too much, so it shouldn't be too much work to, you know, to squeeze that, hand squeeze that. So I'm going to add it to my cutting board. Let me get rid of this can. Okay. And so again, I have these 2 pieces, and you can see I've squeezed a lot of the liquid out. Look at how flat it is. It's no longer juicy like it was earlier. And again, I want that shreddy top bit to separate from the core. So I create 2 piles, the core pile, and then I check this to see if there's any seed pods, and that's ready to go. And then I'll do this one. And again, I'll separate the core and I'll check. And oh, of course, I have 2 pieces that didn't have any seed pods in them. But the seed pods are, let me see if there's any left in the strainer there. Not really. I pretty much broke down most of the seeds, but typically the seeds are literally like these round, sometimes they're like little small round bits. Sometimes they're really big, like as big as the top part of the jackfruit. And so I just like to run my knife through those and break them down a little bit so that they start to blend into this like shreddy bit of jackfruit. So this shreddy bit, they're ready to go. I'm just gonna put them into my bowl. It's ready to go. And then the stuff that I want to break down to look more like the minced, like the shreddable jackfruit, I'm just going to bring my knife, which I'm securely holding by pinching the top of the blade and running, putting my other 3 fingers around the handle, flat hand on the top of the front of the blade. And I'm just gonna run my knife through it to try to break it down until it's into smaller pieces that kind of blend in a bit further to the bigger, to the shreddable chunks of the jackfruit. So breaking that down, it doesn't have to be teeny tiny, just small enough where it's not just like this big triangle chunk that you're biting into. And the other thing is, you know, if it's a big triangle chunk, like if you left the cores like that, when you bite into it, there's like no seasoning or flavor. Like this jackfruit, if you ate it raw, which you can see that it's like pretty flavorless. And so if you left that whole core piece or seed pod in there, when you chew into it, it's going to be like a weird texture, but also flavor. So I just minced it up so that it kind of blends in here to to the rest of my jackfruit here. So I'm gonna try to mix this up. It's like in the tiniest bowl, so I'll probably have some that falls out. But pretty much what I wanna do is now just the big shreddable parts, I just wanna make sure that I break them up enough where I'll end up having to transfer this to something else, I think. I have like, I'm using all my bowls today. Maybe I will do this. I'll do half and half for now. I'll do half in this bowl because I haven't added my vegetable broth to it, and then I'll add the veggie broth later. So all I'm doing is I'm just going through making sure I have like no big chunks of jackfruit in here, and I can use my fingers to break anything down. Like here's a big chunk of jackfruit, right? And so all I want to do is just use my fingers to break that up. And the shreddable parts of the jackfruit are really easy to do that because again, the texture is like imagine like you're shredding like after you cook a whole chicken or something and you're just shredding the meat of the chicken. Similar idea. So I'm just making sure I have no big pieces. Let me add some here. All right. Let's see here. I still have some big pieces here. And again, this is so that it looks a lot like a meat because it's already a bit shredded. But more importantly, I'm gonna season this and then add the Chile Rojo to it. And I want the Chile Rojo and the seasoning to be like on every little bit of jackfruit versus having this like sort of raw piece of jackfruit in the middle. Not raw, but under seasoned or not delicious piece of jackfruit in the middle. Okay, so that looks a lot better. And again, I could keep breaking this down with the back of my spatula or back of a wooden spoon as it's in the pan cooking. So for this jackfruit, before I set it aside, let me just give my hands a quick rinse. All right, let's see here. So I have a couple different seasonings here. If you've been in the other jackfruit classes, I mean, I use cumin and chili flake in pretty much most of the dishes here. Here I am using 2 tablespoons of ground cumin that provide a little bit of depth of flavor, a little bit of smokiness in the dish. And then I have a ½ teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes to give it a little spicy kick. And then I have some fresh ground pepper to taste. And the salt that I'm using is going to be this coarse kosher salt that is a little bit less salty than a fine table salt, a little bit more salty than a Himalayan salt. And so, you know, you just salt according to how salty your salt at home is. And so I'm going to be cooking here or adding here to the jackfruit. It's going to be the 2 tablespoons, and I know I have it in 2 separate bowls, but it'll eventually go into the skillet and it'll all mix together. But I'll just sprinkle half of my seasoning in this bowl, half of my seasoning in that bowl, and eventually I'll put it all together. I'm going to add a couple pinches of salt for mine. Of course, you have to salt everything, even though this is going to get coated with the Chile Rojo. I want to make sure that that has enough salt to start off with. In any step of the way where you're cooking, you want to make sure that you salt along the way. And I'm going to be adding, I have here 3/4 cups of grapeseed oil. You can use any cooking oil that you have on hand. The reason that this is quite a bit of oil is because the jackfruit is not like a chicken or pork where, you know, it has a little bit of fat content in the meat. It's a fruit, so it has no fat at all. And so you have to be able to add some of that to create the texture of like a fatty, juicy meat. And so I'm adding my 3/4 cups of grapeseed oil. You can use an avocado oil. You can use, I use rice bran oil in the kitchen. Just something that has a little bit of high temperature here. And I'm gonna reserve about a 1/4 cup that I'll keep adding as it's cooking. Sometimes it tends to dry out as it's cooking. Okay, and I'm gonna grab my spatula and just give this a mix. and make sure that that seasoning and the oil is all well incorporated. Any questions so far for anyone who is cooking along or just taking notes and maybe lost a step there? Especially the folks who are new to jackfruit, just making sure that that made sense. All right, so this one looks pretty well incorporated. I like to scrape the side of my bowl, make sure I go all the way down to the bottom center and just make sure it's all mixed in. You can see how it coated the jackfruit there, and I'll do that here. Make sure I am going all around, coating. And just like any other meat dish, you could let this marinate in the seasoning. Like maybe if you were gonna, you know, start prepping, like soaking your tamales, which I actually haven't talked about yet, so I have to make sure I get to that right now. You could also break down your jackfruit and let it sit in the fridge marinating overnight and just cook it the next day when you start cooking your tamales. So there's a little bit of prep that you could do ahead of time, just to save, so that it's not this like huge process all in one day, like we're doing today. But it's not too bad, especially if you have 2 people, it goes a lot faster. Okay, so I have my jackfruit that I'm gonna put in a hot skillet that I've been preheating. But before I do that, I actually, let me set this aside here. I actually want to, so that I avoid, you know, getting another pan messy, I'm gonna just grill my chiles before I add the jackfruit so that I don't have to use another pan later to grill the chiles. Does that make sense? So I have here, this is for the salsa rojo. So I'm just kind of transitioning really quick, where I'm just gonna grill these chiles just for a couple minutes in this pan, and then I'll go ahead and add the jackfruit to it. And if you have already started to cook the jackfruit, you can just use a second pan to do them. So I have 4 guajillo chiles and 4 ancho chiles. So the guajillo chiles are a bit longer. They almost look like New Mexico red chilies. They're long and narrow typically. And then the anchos are a dried version of poblano chiles. And they are called anchos because they're wide. Ancho means wide. And again, I took off the stems, I took out the seeds, I gave them a rinse. Dried chiles that are on the fresh side, they tend to be, although they're dried, they're a bit more pliable. When you've had your chiles for a longer time, they tend to get really hard and stiff and they break easily. Those are still okay, although I would use those maybe for like a broth or something like that. But I mean, you could still use them for this dish if that's what you had on hand. But the fresher chiles, like I said, they're dry, but they are easy to, like if this was an old chile, I would do this and it would just break off. So just something to keep in mind with your chiles. And all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add them to a dry skillet that's been preheating. I'm gonna turn up the heat to like a medium heat. It's been on low for the last like 20 minutes or so. And I'm just adding the chiles here. They're not all gonna fit, so I'll probably just do the anchos first and then the guajillos. And I can already hear them starting to sizzle. And I'm gonna grab some tongs. And again, the only reason I'm doing this first is to save myself from washing another pan afterwards. So it might be kind of dark because it's a black skillet with dark chiles in them, but it's starting to sizzle here. I want to cook them for at least like a minute on each side. With the anchos, it's a little bit harder to see because they're already so dark, but you want them to just lightly blacken. And you'll start to see a little bit of the like smokiness of it coming out. They'll become a lot more fragrant. With the guajillos, because they're red, you'll be able to see some of that blackening happen, as opposed to these anchos. It's a little bit harder to see.
Jocelyn, Sabrina has a question. If you let them soak some, would that remedy any breakage?
Well, they're gonna get soaked afterwards. So I would just cook them this way, give them like clean them out, rinse them, grill them like this. And then I would probably soak them a bit longer. Like I recommend to soak these chiles for about 10 minutes in the vegetable broth after they're done. But I would soak the harder ones maybe twice as long, just to make sure that they get fully rehydrated. So these I'm gonna just flip over. And I can see some of that smoke coming out. And I just happen to have a little bit of oil in here from, you know, when you season a cast iron skillet. I didn't add, you can do this in a dry skillet. It doesn't have to have any oil in it. So these just need just about a minute on this side. And then I'm gonna end up adding these to 3 cups of vegetable broth. The bowl that I'm using for my jackfruit is the bowl I'm supposed to be using for the vegetable broth. This is the vegetable broth that I made back here. And it has some dried mushrooms. It has some dried mushrooms, some celery, some bay leaves, some konbu, seaweed. I have a couple of different varieties of dried mushrooms in here, but it's been cooking for maybe about an hour and a half or so. And it was filled all the way to the brim, and then it reduced down about a couple inches. So you want to let it cook down and become really fragrant, aromatic, and it's definitely you know, it's a darker color. It's like and it was just water in there, obviously. All right, I'm gonna bring my chiles guajillos and I'm gonna transfer these out for now. And they're gonna get dropped into the broth in a second. Now these are gonna be a little bit more spicy. The anchos are, I would describe them as almost like a slightly spicy raisin, where the guajillos, they could pack some heat. So this smoke that's coming out is probably gonna make me cough in a second. But I mean, I don't know if you've seen memes of like houses on fire and people are like, oh, like the mom's like, estoy asando los chiles, like she's, you know, grilling up the chiles. I'm gonna turn on my overhead fan. Sorry if you hear that background noise. These, you'll start to see, will blacken fairly quickly. So you can see some of that blackening happening. I'm gonna flip that over. And really what I'm looking for here is a little bit of that blackening that you can see there. You can see the smoke coming out, which is really releasing the oils of the chiles, and they're becoming really aromatic. You don't want to burn them. That's really important. They'll start to become a little bit bitter. You just want them to become, you just want to release the flavor with the heat. And again, once I get this jackfruit out of the bowl and I give it a quick rinse, I'll add my vegetable broth and I'll start soaking them immediately, and I'll let them soak for at least 10 minutes, if not longer. All right, so these chiles, I'm gonna go ahead and just take them out, add them back to the bowl where they were, and let me add in my jackfruit. Let me get these tongs out of the way. I'm gonna slightly lower the heat, get my spatula, and get that jackfruit in there.
Hey, Jocelyn.
Yep.
We missed the explanation. Why do you have the bay leaves in water and la olla?
I just made my own vegetable broth. So if you are using pre-purchased vegetable broth, you don't even have to worry about that step. I made my own vegetable broth before class.
And what alternatives are there to the vegetable broth? Could you use miso?
You could use the miso. I mean, you could just use water and it will still be pretty delicious. But yeah, a miso could work to anything that you want to add that adds more flavor that you enjoy is definitely, you know, a good alternative, something good to consider in this dish. All right, I'm adding all my jackfruit here, scraping it down with my spatula. Again, I'm gonna add 3 cups of vegetable broth to this bowl that I'm scraping down right now. I'm not even gonna give it a rinse because either way, this stuff is all it's all going into the same place. This is the chiles that are going into the same dish in a few minutes. So I'm just going to, and I pretty much cleaned it out with my spatula. Spatulas are, silicone spatulas are like one of my favorite tools in the kitchen. It's like an extension of your hand, and it just wipes everything down so perfectly. Okay, so I have my measuring cup here. And I'm gonna measure just 3 cups of this vegetable broth that I made, or if you purchase yours, or if you're using the miso, you could measure that out. I'm gonna do 3 cups. It's going just a little under a cup each time, so I'm gonna add a little bit extra. And a little bit of, you know, little bits of the veggies are going in there, which I'm fine with. I'll end up blending it all up anyway with the chiles. Let me add just a little bit more. There we go. Okay. So I have my 3 cups of vegetable broth, and I'm going to add my chilies that we just grilled together into this bowl. And I just want to make sure that they get pushed down into the broth. And this bowl that they were in, I'm actually just going to place it right on top to kind of push them down into the liquid. So try not to spill here. The chiles are being pushed down by that other bowl that they were in earlier. And those are going to soak. They're eventually going to get blended up to make my Chile Rojo. So I'll just leave them there by the blender. And then this jackfruit that's in the pan, I just want to keep an eye on it. I have it on about medium heat. And I just want to make sure that I'm turning it every few minutes or so, because obviously the bottom of the pan is a lot hotter than the heat on the top. And so I want to make sure that it cooks evenly and that I don't burn the jackfruit at the bottom. And this will take about 20 or so minutes to cook. And so 20-25 minutes. And then what I'll end up doing is, after the chilies soak for a little while, I'll blend those with not all 3 cups of the liquid. I'll start with 2 cups of the liquid, blend it until it's smooth. If it's really thick and creamy, the reason I start with 2 is because sometimes your Guajillo chiles or your ancho chiles will be smaller, sometimes they'll be bigger. The ones that I use today are all pretty big, so I imagine that I'll be using all 3 cups of the liquid. But if you use smaller chilies, or you know, you don't want to put all the liquid in at first and then you're going to have sort of a watery sauce. Even if you did have a watery sauce, there are a couple ways that you can fix that. One way that you can fix it is you can add it to the jackfruit and see if it's like not too runny. Like you can add it to the jackfruit and you can see if with the cooking it starts to kind of thicken up a little bit, because some of that water will evaporate. Oh, look at that cat. Aww. And the other way that you can also thicken any sauce, you can always grill more chiles and add more chiles, or you can get a tortilla and add it over the flame on your stove and let it get kind of blackened, kind of stiff. Let that tortilla dry out almost to the state of a tostada, but obviously it's not fried. And when that tortilla gets really hard and crispy, you can add pieces or that whole tortilla to any sauce that you're making, and it will, you know, once you blend it in the blender, it'll help thicken up the sauce. So you can do that. I've done that plenty of times. You also could add like some, you know, like masarina or something like that to it to thicken it, although that's a little bit more finicky for me because it's still raw and it needs to heat up, and then you can't really see right away the results. Whereas with the tortilla, you see those results immediately and you get to the desired texture that you want for your sauce, or consistency that you want for your sauce. So just, that's a little tip to think about if you're ever in a pinch and you need to just fix a sauce really quickly. And that'll work for your pipianes, even for like moles or any, I mean, mole has so many ingredients, so it's very unlikely that you'd have a mole sauce that's like super thin and runny. It's probably going to be more thick than anything else. Okay, so I'm going to just keep making sure that my jackfruit is okay. And while this jackfruit is cooking, I'm going to go back into the future because or back into the past, because I should have told you about the corn husks. Let me grab them. All right, so about 3 or 4 hours ago, I started soaking these corn husks. I warmed up some water in my electric kettle, and I put them in the biggest pot that I have, and I just I counted them out. I have 24 here. The reason I have 24, you're not going to come out with 24 tamales, but sometimes some rip, sometimes some are really thin and narrow. Like this one's pretty thin and narrow, and you'll probably have to add 2 to make it the size that you need. For the tamal, actually, this one's folded. But yeah, it's just good to have a few extra already soaked, because the last thing you want is, you know, for you to already be making your tamales and you're like, oh my goodness, I need 3 more tamal husks to finish this process, and you don't have them because you didn't soak them. So then you have to go through that whole process again. So you want to have a few extra. Any extra, you could dry them again and add them back to your batch, or you could compost them. And so I have 24 here. I covered them in hot water, and then I put a couple of heavy cups, like mugs, on top of them to make sure that they sank into the water, and they became a lot more pliable. You know, it's easy to fold them over at this point. This is just the consistency that you want for your corn husks, because typically when you buy them, they're really dry, brittle. It can break easily or tear very easily. And so I soaked those for a few hours. So that I did. You could soak them overnight if that's easier. It's just, again, something you can work on the night before. Is like, maybe you can break down your jackfruit, you can soak your corn husks, you can season your jackfruit, pop it in the fridge, and just leave it there overnight. And then that way, when you come back to it the next day, you already have a little bit of a faster process for yourself. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the masa while the jackfruit continues to cook, because I also want my masa to have just a little bit of time to rest. I usually let my masa rest for like 30 minutes. I don't think I'll have that time today, but I just want to get right into it. And as we go, I'm gonna just keep checking on my jackfruit just to make sure I'm not burning it. And if I see that it dries out at any point, because again, you know, my oil is also evaporating here because I have it on a medium heat, so I have some steam that's coming out. I could always continue to add a little bit more oil to create a crispy texture that I typically look for in a jackfruit. And also my skillet is pretty filled to the brim here with jackfruit, and by the time it's cooked, it'll definitely cook down a little bit. So just making sure nothing burns here.
Hey, Jocelyn, what if we didn't soak the husk?
Soaking the husk is definitely a key component of the recipe. So if you didn't soak it, I would get to soaking it right now, right away, especially if you're cooking along. You can heat up some water, put them in a bowl, a bucket, a big pot, pour hot water over them and let them soak for at least 30 minutes. Because then your life will be so much easier. It's hard to get them to fold in the way that you want them to if they're so hard. So you need to soak them to get them soft and pliable again. So I'm gonna get these out of the way. I'm gonna grab my masa. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about masa here. So here I'm using Gold Mine, which is one of the, I'm pretty sure I added them to the ingredient source. Yeah, it's back here, and the ingredient source is in the back of the book. So if you do have the book in front of you, on page 152, there is this list of ingredients that you can purchase online. And so you can purchase the masarina, which is a dry corn flour that's already gone through nixtamal. And I'll explain that a little bit more. And so you could purchase that online and get it directly delivered to you, although I know it's a little bit tricky right now. It seems to be getting a little bit better with COVID-19, like getting things shipped directly to you. But some people were like, you gave us this list, but like people are not delivering. I'm like, I didn't know I was gonna launch a book in the middle of a pandemic. I'm really sorry. But it just is what it is. So order your things with time, but also at your local Mexican food store or your local health food store, you're typically able to find some. So this Gold Mine white organic masarina, I purchased at my local health food store. And I haven't worked with this one with tamales yet. I've made tortillas out of it. So, and actually I just realized the back has a recipe for vegan tamales and how to make the masa. And weird, the masa even calls for cumin and chili powder and garlic powder. And okay, that's interesting. I don't know if I would go by that recipe on the back of the bag, but hey, if it sounds interesting, you can. So this I got at a local health food store called Grassroots in South Pasadena. If you're in Los Angeles, they had lots of these bags that they were selling, and it's a white corn masarina. They also, the same store, had this Chef Mex organic corn masarina. I haven't opened this bag yet. I haven't worked with this brand, so it'll be something that I'll be experimenting with in the next few days. And then the one that I typically have on hand, because they sell this now at Northgate, Whole Foods, lots of stores have this, is Bob's Red Mill gold or yellow corn, golden corn is what they call it, yellow corn organic masarina. And the reason masarina is important, like if you have cornmeal or other corn products in your home, masarina is important because it's already gone through the nixtamal process, which means that the dry corn has been rehydrated with cal or limestone or calcium to essentially remove the outer shell or the outer layer of the corn to help this digest better. And to also, it helps you digest better, and it also helps to remove any of like the like sort of like, I wouldn't say toxins in the outer husk, because obviously we do eat them in other ingredients, but it just becomes like a more nutritious ingredient. And so with the masarina, this is creating like it's like a huge shortcut for us, because we didn't cook the corn in cal for, usually I would start this overnight. So I would cook the corn in liquid with a little bit of cal, which is like a dry powder that you can find at Mexican food stores. And once the corn has cooked in the cal for at least like 30 minutes or so, I turn off the heat and let it sit there overnight. And then the next morning you come back to it. I like to have gloves on because just to like, you know, not have your fingers in the cal really. And I rub the corn in between my hands to remove pretty much, you know, the outer layer, the outer skin of the corn. And you keep rinsing and rubbing until the corn is all cleaned off of that exterior shell. And then, and then you might have to keep cooking it if it's still not cooked all the way through to the center, to cook the corn all the way through until it softens, and then grind it to start to create your masa. So, you know, going through nixtamal and creating masa from scratch is a huge process. And that's not even thinking about harvesting the corn. I mean, that in itself must be a huge process. So getting this dried masarina is like, wow, next level, we're in the future. And so what I'm gonna do here, I forgot to turn on my kettle, electric kettle. I have some water, 2 cups of water that's heating up in my electric kettle. This is 3 cups of masarina. Important to note is that I didn't grab my measuring cup and dump it into the bag and like scoop it out, because that really compacts the amount of masa. This goes for anything that you're working with, any bags of flour, sugar, like whatever it is that you have. It's really important for you to either pour out into the measuring cup or to grab a spoon and pour into your measuring cup. If you scoop into the bag, you'll grab a lot more and it'll get really compacted into that cup. So I'm letting my water heat up, and it heats up really quickly. And then I need to grab, so I want to do the hot water first. And the reason is because the hot water is gonna allow this masarina to start to absorb the ingredients really quickly. It'll start to kind of activate the corn again. If I were to add cold water here, it'd be really runny and watery, and it would take a while for it to come to the consistency that I want. But the hot water is gonna almost like start cooking the corn again, so that I could then start integrating the other ingredients to it. And it's almost there. Yeah, I can feel it's getting hot. And
Jocelyn,
so,
we have a masa question. Someone got the fresh unprepared masa from Kernel of Truth, and it's definitely not dry like the bagged. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so with that masa that you have there, you could omit the water and the vegetable broth if you have the recipe in front of you, and just start working with the other ingredients. Start adding the refined coconut oil, the vegan butter. Sorry, I'm trying to turn off this fan. The baking powder, and sorry, I lost track of my jackfruit here too. I'm gonna have like too many things spinning. And so you can omit the other liquid ingredients, the water and the vegetable broth, and kind of see what your consistency is. And you'll see what my consistency is right now. And if yours is still a little too thick, you can add a little bit of liquid to loosen it up slightly. So I see that my water kettle is steaming. It just turned off. So I have 2 cups of boiling hot water that I'm gonna pour in to my masa. So I'm just giving my jackfruit a little turn here. Okay, so that's good to go. So I'll have my 2 cups here in my kettle that I measured out beforehand, and I'm just gonna pour it in to my masa harina here. And this is 3 cups of masa harina, so this is definitely not even enough liquid, right? Like if you were gonna make tortillas or something, you definitely wanna do like equal parts, you know, water to masa harina. But so this water is just enough to activate it, but I'm still gonna add other liquid components to it. I'm gonna use a whisk here just to kind of help me expose any of the dry bits of masa harina that are still tucked in there that didn't get hit with any of that water. Any other questions for folks who are thinking about, maybe you don't have the masa harina in front of you, you're thinking about which one to purchase. So look at how thick that is. That's definitely because, and look at how much is in my whisk. I'll end up getting that out with the spatula in a second. So that definitely needs a lot more liquid. I'm gonna add a cup of my vegetable broth to it. Let me grab that. And this one, I do want to be a little bit more mindful to not grab, like if you make your own vegetable broth, I don't really want to have any extra bits in my, so right here, this is just under 3/4 cup, so I still need to add a little bit more. Let's get that out. All right, there we go. And actually this will be, any little bits will be concealed because it'll have the activated charcoal. But if you weren't adding the activated charcoal, I'd just be mindful that if you do make your own vegetable broth and there's like any little bits in the broth, you'll be able to see them in your masa. All right, so let me keep working this. Let me grab my spatula too. My bowl is hot because this is all hot liquid. I have another spatula here that I'll use to kind of help me keep working this. All right. Whoa, I just spilled a bunch onto my computer. Awesome. I'm going to come back to this whisk in a moment. Once it gets a bit more runny, I'll start to work with the whisk again. If you have a hand mixer, you can always use the hand mixer as well. But you just want to make sure you get something in there, like a whisk or a hand mixer. I mean, you could use a spatula, but the whisk makes sure that every little last bit is like fully incorporated. So I have 1 cup of refined, really important that it's refined, coconut oil. If you were using virgin coconut oil, your tamales would taste like coconut, and you don't want that. So I have here 1 cup of refined, very important that it's refined. And again, this is what's replacing the lard, right? And I have some vegan butter that I'm gonna add too. But this fat is important, an important part of our masa recipe because it just gives it that lusciousness. And here I have some vegan butter that melted, created a little bit of a separation there. But I used Nyokos. If you have, it just has to be softened butter, but this has been sitting out for probably over an hour already, so it really melted all the way. But this is a coconut oil and cashew-based vegan butter. This is 4 tablespoons. It just has to be softened butter. It doesn't have to be melted, just softened. And I'm gonna use my spatula to scrape that out. And so the last few ingredients that I'm gonna add here in a moment are my salt. Obviously you wanna salt this. I also need to add baking powder because that's gonna help these tamales slightly rise when they cook and steam. I'm using, again, that outer edge to mix it in. Go ahead.
Is there a vegan butter in particular that you find works the best? And is refined coconut oil the best fat to add?
Yeah, I mean, you could use shortening if that's what you have on hand, although I don't really like the ingredients in shortening. I think that coconut oil is like the healthiest option to add. But if you didn't want to use that, you could use shortening. You could use some sort of oil that you might have on hand, like some sort of vegetable-based oil. Let me check my jackfruit here again. And then the vegan butter that I typically have on hand are, I think the 2 most popular, which are either like an Earth Balance, which is in a yellow tub, available at most grocery stores nowadays. And the other one is a Miyoko's vegan butter, which I really like. I'm adding just a little bit more oil to my jackfruit. Added the rest of it. Keeping my eye on that. Okay. So again, if you had a hand mixer, you can definitely get in here with a hand mixer. I'll get in with the whisk in a moment. It's a lot of arm work. It's your arm work out of the day, really. But yeah, if you had a hand mixer, it'll help you break it down a little bit more. And then I'm gonna add here, I have a tablespoon and a half of the activated charcoal, if you have that on hand. And activated charcoal is essentially like almost like it's a charcoal, it's like an ash from mostly coconut shells. Again, pretty flavorless, mostly just used here for color. People use it, like they put it in water, other things. It's like it helps to remove toxins from the body. That's the main reason why people really love activated charcoal. And then I'm also adding here 2 teaspoons of baking powder that's gonna help my masa rise. So I'm gonna sprinkle that in. You're gonna see how it becomes this black blob. And of course I wanna add some salt. I'm gonna add a couple generous, and this activated charcoal is so fine, like even the salt going on there like makes it poof up. All right. I'm gonna gently fold that in. You can see like how fine and thin the activated charcoal is. So I really need to carefully mix that in because it'll just like poof all over the place into the air. All right. And this is where I'll get back into the whisk again. If you had a hand mixer, that would help too. And I want to let this, once it's fully mixed in, rest a little bit. And this is still looking pretty thick to me. I want it to be a little bit looser. Usually it's a little bit runnier. So it could be, I haven't made tamales with this gold mine before. So it just could be that it needs a little bit more liquid. For folks who are cooking along, how is it looking for you? All right.
Someone says theirs is looking a little thick.
Yeah, mine is looking a little thick right now too. When I use my spatula, I'm able to work it in here a little bit more too. So I'm probably gonna add just another little tiny bit. Actually, this is not looking too bad here, because the consistency that you're looking for is, so when you make masa for tortillas, you obviously have like this Play-Doh-like consistency, where the masa is definitely not as runny and soft as this. For this, I wanted to still form into like a little bit of a slightly runny dough, which is starting to get there. I just need to keep working it a little bit more. Where I want to be able to like smear that masa onto the tamal husk, and I want it to still hold a little bit of shape there. I don't want to look, some of this white masa still hasn't broken down. I'm gonna get my hands in here too, just to make sure if I have any little bits, I can break it down a little bit. So this is where that hand mixer would come in and be a game changer here. I don't have a hand mixer. These classes have all been teaching me things that I want to do, the little products and things like that that I want to get for home, just to help my process out a little bit more.
Will there be a difference in texture in the masa if we use an electric mixer?
It'll be a little bit smoother. So at the kitchen, when we make tamales, we use like a stand-up mixer. And so yes, that definitely smooths it all out, gets out any little chunks that you might have. Like here, I'm experiencing some a little bit of clumping happening with my masa. So the hand mixer helps with that process to avoid some of that. I've done this small batch at home plenty of times. I've used Bob's Red Mill, has been my kind of go-to for tamales here at home. And I haven't had this clumping issue with the smaller batch. I'm usually able to get it all pretty well incorporated just by hand with a whisk and a spatula. But let me just make sure that I'm getting all these little bits incorporated into it. So this is the consistency that I'm looking for, in that I'm not going to add any more liquid to it. I'm going to leave it as is. But what I'm looking for is sort of this like dough that where I can like grab the amount of masa that I need. I can smear it onto the tamal. It's not liquidy, where it's going to like, you know, be all super soggy or like falling apart. It kind of does hold its own. Rather than like, you know, I've seen other folks who have made like a really runny tamal, like masa. But when, for example, like even when you go to a Mexican store and you buy masa preparada, which is masa that's already been prepared to make tamales, it's not runny. It's still a little bit of a dough. It's just moistened a lot more because it has lard in it. So I'm not looking for something that's like kind of like a thick soup or a paste. I guess this is kind of like a paste, but it's not soupy. It's definitely, it holds its own. All right. I'm just looking for any other little chunks that I see there that haven't been super well incorporated. And I could feel like the coconut oil in here. It's nice and moist dough. And again, when I smear this on my corn husk, you'll see that, you know, it's not going to drip off of the tamal, the husk. It's going to still hold its shape to a certain extent. It's spreadable, you know, so I'll still be able to spread it throughout. Any other questions that are coming through for folks right now? Let me check my jackfruit. So I'm going to come back to this masa in a couple minutes. Let me give it one last check here. I'll let it hang out for a few moments, and then I'm going to come back to make my Chile Rojo sauce, which is really fast. All right.
Hey, Jocelyn, what did you say you use in the kitchen to blend the masa?
Stand-up mixer. So if you don't have a stand-up mixer is essentially like most of the brands you see at home are like KitchenAids, where it has a bowl, like a metal bowl on the bottom, and then the top of the, it's like a machine that sits on your counter and the top kind of like comes up, and there's usually like a whisk or some sort of a mixing piece attached to the top part, and then you pop it into the bowl and it mixes. That's a stand-up mixer that would work really well for this if you have one at home. If you don't, you could also use a hand mixer, which is the one that you hold in your hand and it mixes everything together really well. People use that for like cake batters and stuff like that. So you could use either or if you have them on hand. Otherwise, we're gonna do this old school style like our abuelitas did, because they did not have any of those tools at hand. They just did it by hand. And they probably even had both hands in there, just making sure that it was all really, really well incorporated. I wouldn't even doubt it if they used some other tool like a metate or something to just make sure like all the corn was like just finely ground and not clumping at all, and make sure that you have a fine masarina. Okay, so let me get to my Chile Rojo because I know that we're getting
Hey, Jocelyn, you're still on mute.
Thanks. Okay, not sure what happened there. I have been soaking now, at least maybe even 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to take the top bowl off. Let me bring my blender a bit closer. And my chiles have rehydrated. Let me get some tongs in here so you can see. So they are much softer. The liquid that they were soaking in has also turned a little bit of a red color. So they've absorbed some of that liquid. So I'm going to pop these into my blender and add about, this is 3 cups total of vegetable broth that we added in here. I'm going to start with about 2 cups. I'm going to season it with some salt, and then I'll check to see if it needs any more liquid. I'm going to move that handle over. My jackfruit here is sizzling, is crisping, is browning, which is what I'm looking for. It'll lose a little bit of this crispiness once I add the Chile Rojo to it, which is fine, but I still think that just the process of browning this jackfruit provides flavor. So even if you don't have a crispy jackfruit, which obviously it wouldn't stay crisp because you're gonna then insert it into a tamal and then steam it. So there's no way it would stay crispy, but you're giving it nice, good flavor. So I'm gonna grab my chiles and I'll add them to my blender. I'm just kind of draining them slightly, adding them to my blender, all of them. And you can use a measuring cup if you want. I'll use a measuring cup or maybe I'll do it this way. I'll do it right over my blender. Let me adjust it so you can see right above. So I'm just going to pour in 2 cups. There's 1 cup. There's 2 cups. And I still have about a cup left in here. Ooh. Move this up. Okay, and I'm going to add some salt, which is back here. You can add a little bit of pepper if you want. I'll add a little bit of ground pepper. Obviously, you don't have to add that. Salt will be just enough. And then I'm gonna blend this until it's nice and smooth. This blender, if I go too fast, it turns off on me. So I'm blending until I see that all the little pieces of the chile have been fully blended in to make it a sauce, that there's no little pieces. I'm using a Vitamix here, which I didn't mention, that is one of the most powerful home blenders that you can use. It has this wand, or it's called a tamper, that helps you kind of push things down and make sure that it's getting hit by the blade and breaking it down. If you don't have this blender, if you have a regular home blender, you can stop at some point and lift the lid off, turn it off, take the lid off, use a spatula to scrape down the sides, turn it back on, you know, put the lid on, turn it back on, and keep blending. So it might take a little bit longer to get to the consistency that you want. If you still have little chunks of chiles in there, you could also pass the sauce through like a fine strainer just to catch any of the little chile bits. But the Vitamix typically tends to break it all down. And so what I'm looking for, like for me, this still feels a little bit thick. I'm gonna add a little bit more of my vegetable broth to make it a little bit smoother. It's still kind of thick, not really chunky, but a kind of like, so I just want to smooth it out just a bit more, because obviously as it heats up and coats the jackfruit, it's going to thicken up a little bit. And I'm tasting for salt. It's so yummy. It definitely needs a little bit more salt. So I'm gonna add just another couple pinches of salt here. You want to make sure that your filling for your tamales is nice and seasoned well. So I'm just gonna add another little, maybe like a quarter cup or so of liquid, and I'm gonna blend that through. So the consistency that I'm looking for is a sort of smooth sauce, which I'm pretty much there. I could add the rest of my liquid if I wanted to, but I want something that'll coat the back of the spoon. Like if I run my finger that way, it still like holds. So I want it to be kind of thick. I'm gonna give a quick taste. It's good on salt. I'm gonna add just a little bit more of the liquid to it, and then I should be good to go. Again, I'm doing it little by little rather than adding it all at the beginning, just in case it does turn out that I, you know, didn't need all that liquid in there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and, it's almost like the consistency, I would say, of like a little bit thinned out barbecue sauce or something like that, you know? So I'm going to go ahead and scrape down my tamper, and I'm going to scrape it all out of my blender and add it to my jackfruit. I have my jackfruit now on like very, very low heat. Very, very low heat, just because I just want to warm this sauce through, but I want to cool it down so I can start playing with it in my tamales. It's about to go overboard here. Let me get some of that over here. Let me mix this in before I add more. So really what I want to see is I want to see all the Chile Rojo coating all the bits of jackfruit. The jackfruit will start to absorb some of this Chile Rojo. Okay, and I'm just going to, I have it again on like pretty low heat here, just enough to warm it through, meld it together. But again, it's still going to cook together in the tamales for at least 45 minutes plus. So it'll still have plenty of time to do its thing inside of the tamal. So this, I'm not gonna add any more to it right now. If I see it start to thicken up and become a little bit too thick, I'll add some more of the, I have a little bit more, maybe about a cup of Chile Rojo left in my blender. You can use it for something else. You can literally eat it with tortilla chips. But I like this consistency here where it's definitely coated all of my jackfruit. It has a little bit of runniness to it, but not too much, because I don't want this to be dripping out of the tamal that I'm gonna wrap it in. And we need to get into the tamales at this point because we're just about out of time. So what I'm gonna show you really quick is just how I wrap the tamal, and I'm also gonna show you how I prepare my pot for steaming. So what's really important for any tamales is that, let me get this out of the way here. Get my blender out of the way. So what's really important for any tamales is that you have a pot. This is like a medium pot. You could have a very large one, but this medium one should work for the amount of tamales that we have. And I have the steamer that has little legs on the bottom that'll help it stand maybe about an inch above the bottom of the pot. So just note how high or how tall your steamer is, and you want to add that much water to the bottom of your pot. You don't want to go over, because then your tamales will be in the liquid. So you want them to just be steamed, but not touching the water. So what I like to do is I like to keep it closed like this, and then I put it in the bottom of my pot, and I'm going to go to my sink and I'm going to put water in, and I can see, okay, it's still not, because once it's open, it's hard for me to see how much water is in there. And then this helps me see, and I'm going to add just about an inch of water here. So I can see that it's just about there. And what's really important is that you maintain a nice level of water in your pot as the tamales are cooking. So here you can see
Hi, Jocelyn, you got on mute again.
oh my goodness, this laptop. So what I did is I just brought it over to my pot, and then I opened up the steamer. I knew that the water wasn't going to be covering my my steamer at all, and that's what I'm going to make sure I stand my tamales up on. So, and I'll show you really quickly here one of the last few steps, which is wrapping our tamales. So let me make some space here. Actually, I'll do it over here. This is probably the best. It'll be a little bit darker over here. Like so many moving parts with tamales. I'm also turning on my pot of the water so that it's like on a medium low heat so it can start to warm up. And I'm going to put the lid on, not a jar, just straight on the pot. That way it can start to slowly get hot in there. And that steam is what's going to cook our tamales. So I am going to move you all over and I'm gonna make a tamal. You can see, and I could see here that my jackfruit is also kind of bubbling because I have it on very low heat. So it's all kind of melding together, the jackfruit and the Chile Rojo. Doesn't that look like meat, right? Doesn't it just look like chicken and Chile Rojo or pork and Chile Rojo? So really simple, really easy to do. Let me get into my tamal now. So I'm gonna bring you all over here.
Jocelyn, what do you do when you run into the issue of the water boiling off before the steaming is completed?
You just have to keep checking if it needs more water. You can tell that there, like usually when it's steaming, there's a nice amount of like steam on the top of the lid and vapor. And when that starts to dry out, you'll see less of that happening. And you could always add a little bit more liquid to it. So for this recipe, if you're making the one batch and you add at least like an inch of water and you have it on like a medium heat, you should be fine. At one point, if you feel a little cautious, you can use some tongs to kind of move your steamer to the side and see how much liquid is in there, or you can gently move your tamales to the side and add maybe like a quarter cup to half a cup of water, and just keep looking at the bottom of the steamer to see if there's any that is trying to come up over the steamer. It'll be fine if it's just a tiny little bit that's going up above the steamer. That's not too big of a big deal or too big of a deal. But if you have like a significant amount of water that's over the steamer and they're like boiling versus steaming, that could become too much moisture issue for the tamales. Okay, so I'm going to bring over a plate. I guess I could just do it on my counter. It's already kind of dirty from all this. And so I'm gonna grab a couple different shapes of tamales just to show you what you would do in this process. And I'm gonna turn down my jackfruit at this point. I'm gonna just turn it off so I can start working with it. Okay, so for my tamal husks here, I'm directly on my counter. So for this husk, I like the width of it. It's nice and wide, but you'll notice that the bottom of it has a lot of breaks in it. So I would add another tamal leaf over that to kind of help me spread the masa there without it breaking through. See all these cuts here? So this one is still usable. And your masa, for folks who have never made tamales before, there's a narrow part of your tamal husk and a more wide bottom. The masa is gonna go on the wide bottom. And I'm gonna use this one here that has a nice bottom that isn't torn to create a second layer for this tamal. So I'm just adding a second layer there. I just put the one on top of the other so that I can start to add my masa here. If you had another, really narrow one, you could add another narrow one there too. And so I'm gonna just come back to my masa. I'm gonna give it another little mix. And again, it's like this juicy dough, it has definitely some, you can tell that it has a nice amount of fat content in there with the coconut oil and the vegan butter. And so I'm gonna add about 4 to 5 tablespoons of my masa to my leaf. Add a little bit more here. And essentially what I want to do is I want to create a little bit of a square. So I want to spread this out and create a little bit of a square for my filling to go in. And I want to leave some space on both edges. I typically like to add more masa to the right side of my tamal. I know for you it's backwards right now, but this is the right side of my tamal. I leave a little bit of space on the corn husk. I spread it out. You want it to be about 1/4 inch or so of thickness. Keep spreading it out. I keep going in and making sure that I'm trying to keep my masa together. You could use your hands for this. The spatula is just like I said, an extension of my hand. It's so awesome. All right, so check that out, right? Just spreading my masa. If you see any parts that have become uncovered, where you can see the tamal husk, you can add like just a bit more masa there, or you can spread it out a little bit more. So this is, in a nutshell, kind of what you're looking for, this like square of masa. And then I'm gonna add a couple tablespoons of my Chile Rojo. Let me grab a spoon just so it's easier. It'll slide off of my spatula. Grab a bigger spoon. I want to add a little bit of my Jackfruit Chile Rojo. And again, I'm moving a bit fast here, but taste it, make sure it all tastes good. It has enough salt. So I have a couple tablespoons of my Chile Rojo in there. And then what I'm gonna do is I want to bring the right side over, and essentially what I'm doing is I'm covering the filling. See how I just lifted that leaf up? And then I wanna come around and kind of seal it together. So you have your tamal here. I'm gonna fold in this right side kind of tightly, and then fold the left side over the right. And then I want to use my fingers to kind of push up, so that essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a seal here. I'm pinching my masa together, and I'm also pinching it upward towards the rest of the masa. And this bottom narrow piece that is now folded over is going to get folded towards the fold of the tamal. Does that make sense? So I'm not folding it away from the side that doesn't have the folded pieces together. All the folds come in the same direction, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And then I like to just kind of press it down into my countertop or surface. And then I will typically, when we're working at the kitchen, I like to leave a little bit of visibility of what the filling is. Like I'll kind of pinch it to seal a little bit, but I want to see if it's cheese or chile, because sometimes we're cooking them in the same pot. And I want to know what kind of tamal it is. If you already know what it is, you could just use your fingers to seal that tamal up. And there you have it. And the other important piece of your tamal is that when you put it in your pot, I could hear that my pot is already, the water is boiling. I'm gonna slightly lower the heat. I don't want it to be like super, super boiling. I want it to just be steaming the tamales at a steady pace. You can see that steam coming out of my pot. It's really hot at this point. What's really important is that this tamal, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stand it in my pot. I'm not gonna lay it down, and that the exposed part of my tamal is facing up. It's not facing down, because it'll all fall apart. And I'm gonna stand with the folded part on the side of my pot. Because if I put it towards the middle, it'll just open up, right? It'll just do this. And so I want it to stay folded like this. And so I'm gonna stand it up in my pot, and I'll show you what that looks like there. And essentially what I'll keep doing is I will keep creating more tamales and standing them up. You can make them all at once and then bring them all over and stand them up in your pot. And I'll stand them all around the edges, and then I'll do another layer where I'm kind of going in the inner circle of the first set of tamales that we're standing in the pot. So I'll make one more right now. Feel free to ask any questions as I'm making any more. Before we wrap up, I know we're a little over time here. I'm gonna get another tamal husk. See, like this one, I love. This one is great. Doesn't have any tears on the bottom edge, super wide. It's like really flexible, pliable. This is one of my favorite leaves to work with, or husks to work with. So I just want to, if it has any dripping liquid like this one does, you can just use a towel to kind of pat it dry. Paper towel, cloth towel, just kind of pat it dry. You don't want it to be like soaking wet. It's just, you wet it earlier so that it's nice and pliable. And again, I'm adding about 4 to 5 tablespoons of my masarina, prepared masarina, to the tamal husk. And I'm gonna start pressing it down, working it here to spread it out, trying to create a little kind of a square shape out of it. You can create an assembly line here. So notice that as I pull my tamal sheet open or husk, it broke there. So I want to make sure that I fill that in.
I could either just like make sure I press down there, or I can add more masa if I needed to. So I have about a 1/4 inch thickness here. Again, see that breakage there. So I want to just make sure that that's filled in. And the tamales that I'm making, I mean, I would say that my family's from Zacatecas, so like our tamales are not big. So it depends on the region that you're from. Like I know tamales from Oaxaca, for example, are huge. Some tamales in Central America, South America are also huge. Some of them they use, like if you have extra bits of tamal that are just like the husks that are just like super torn up. This one's actually not, but if it was, you'll see that this husk has veins going lengthwise down the husk, and I could just easily tear almost like a strip off of this, and I can use that strip to tie the bottom end or the top end of the tamal. So some people focus on the center. They'll put all the masa in the center, and then they'll tie the top and the bottom with the husk strip. Some people, like my family, focuses on the bottom wider side. I know in Central America, they don't fill the tamal. They put it like the masa ball in the middle of they also use banana leaves typically there. So they'll put the masa ball in the banana leaf, and then they'll put the toppings not inside, but on top, and then wrap it up. So when you open the tamal, you can immediately see what else is in there because it's on top. So there's many different ways that you can do this. You don't have to fill in the center if you don't want to, if it's a little bit more difficult. But it's just, it contains the sauce and the liquid. Like typically the ones where in Central America where the stuff is on top, it's typically like olives, maybe like a few pieces of meat or something like that, like chicken or something like that. Some peppers that have been grilled, peeled, and cut into strips. So you could do any variety of things, you know, but this just kind of helps keep the chile it would be kind of a messy process if it was just on top. Okay, so I have a couple tablespoons. I actually probably went a little too hard right there with my Chile Rojo. Let me take a little bit out.
Someone has a question. If their husks came with a spreader, is it worth trying to use it?
A spreader? I'm not sure what a spreader is. I would love to see what that person is talking about. So as I'm waiting for that, I'm gonna again fold the masa over, so I'm covering the filling, and then I'm going to tightly wrap. So that was the right side of my husk that I folded first, then the left side gets wrapped all around. The fold is here right now. So I wanna bring my bottom of my husk, I'm gonna pinch it so that I'm sealing the bottom of that tamal. And then I'm folding, and then I have the top here where I wanna just pinch that shut. And then that is just ready to go into my pot. So yeah, I'd love to see what this person is talking about, a spreader. And I haven't heard of that yet. So, but it came with the tamal husks. If you want to show me what that looks like, that would be great. And the other thing I'll mention is that you want to cook these tamales. You want to cook them for at least 45 minutes or until you feel like the masa is cooked all the way through, that it's fluffy. You could do a tester where, you know, I like to let them cook for at least somewhere in between 45 minutes to an hour, but at least sometimes at 45 they're done. Sometimes they need a little bit more time. One thing that is going to take more time for mine is because I'm opening the pot and putting them in one by one. And if you have them all done at the same time, you pile them into your pot, put the lid on, and then make sure that it just stays shut and you don't tamper with it really. It'll cook a little bit faster. Where I'm like releasing the steam, and that's the steam that's cooking them every time I open the pot to put another tamal in. So that's gonna increase my cook time. So, I recommend, I was just doing that because I was showing you all, but I recommend like if you could get them all done and then put them in, that's the better option.
Do you have to turn them in the pot?
No, you don't have to turn them at all. So once you put them in, they can just stay in that same position for the entire cooking process. No turning needed. So similar to like a dumpling, for example, that you would be steaming, like you don't have to turn that either. You just make sure that it's fully immersed in the steaming process, and then it's good to go. And you could do a test. So like if I cook it for like 45 minutes, an hour, I first look at the top, because obviously the top is further away from the hotter portion of the pot, which is on the bottom, right? And so I can like take a little piece off of a bit of tamal, kind of like investigate and look at it, or you can just open it up and eat a piece of it, or cut through the middle and make sure that your masa is cooked all the way through, and that it's a little bit fluffy, it'll be really tender, but that it's not any raw masa, that it's cooked.
And Sabrina sent a picture or a link to the picture of the spreader. It looks like it's just a flat surface with a grip on it that you.
Oh, interesting. So, I mean, you could use it. I'm using a spatula right now. That could work, where maybe you just like press it down and kind of spread it around there. And then maybe you can just use your hand to make sure that it's not. I know some people, they don't really focus on like the shape. Like like I've had some tamales where like, you know, as soon as you open up the first fold, there's like masa already in there, or there's masa on like the outside, like there's just like masa everywhere. And it could be because they're just making them faster and they're just putting the masa all the way across the whole entire husk and then just folding it over, and there's like masa in all areas of it. So you could do that, but I prefer to just kind of make sure that the masa is all touching the filling and that it's like its own little like pocket, essentially.